Hi, welcome to our next subunit related to the art of ancient Rome. In this segment, we're going to be looking at the painting and Republican architecture and sculpture. Roman art is a very broad topic spanning almost 1,000 years in 3 continents from Europe to Africa and Asia. The first Roman art can be dated back to 509 BCE with the legendary founding of the Roman Republic and lasted until about 330 CE. Roman art also encompasses a broad spectrum of media, including marble, painting, mosaic, gems, silver, and bronze work, as well as terracottas, just to name a few. The city of Rome was a melting pot, and the Romans had no qualms about adapting artistic influences from the other Mediterranean cultures that surrounded and preceded them. For this reason, it is common to see Greek, Etruscan, and Egyptian influences throughout Roman art. This is not to say that all Roman art is derivative, though, and one of the challenges for specialists is to define what is Roman about Roman art. We're going to look at a map. So we're going to be in this area, Italy. You know, Italy looks like a little boot, and then here it is sort of blown up for you here. Latin-speaking inhabitants of Rome became a power and overthrew Etruscan kings. We learned about the Etruscans in our last subunit. They established a republic, and much of Etruscan culture was absorbed. They were also great admirers of Greek art, like the Etruscans. The Romans eventually unified what is now Italy and went on to establish an empire that encompassed the entire Mediterranean region. Those conquered by Rome gradually assimilated Roman legal, administrative, and cultural structures that lasted for 5 centuries. The Romans themselves adapted Greek gods, myths, and religious belief practices into their religions. Many Romans adopted the so-called mystery cult religions of the people they conquered. These cult religions often flourished alongside the state religion. And as you will see later on, we will discover that Christianity was actually a mystery cult religion when it first started out. Greek art certainly had a powerful influence on Roman practice. The Roman poet Horace famously said that Greece, the captive, took her savage victor captive, meaning that Rome, though it conquered Greece, adapted much of Greece's cultural and artistic heritage, as well as importing many of its most famous works. It is also true that many Romans commissioned versions of famous Greek works from earlier centuries. That is why we often have marble versions of lost Greek bronzes, such as the Doryphorus by Polykleitos that you see here. The Romans did not believe that, as we do today, that to have a copy of an artwork was any less value than that to have the original. The copies, however, were often more variations rather than direct copies, and they could have small changes made to them. So we're going to start out looking at the Republic, the history of Republican Rome. The mythic founding of the Roman Republic is supposed to have happened in 509 BCE, when the last Etruscan king, Tarquinius Superbus, was overthrown. During the Republic period, the Romans were governed by annually elected magistrates. The two consuls being the most important among them, and the Senate, which was the ruling body of the state. Eventually, the system broke down and civil war ensued between 100 and 42 BCE. The wars were finally brought to an end when Octavian, later called Augustus, defeated Mark Antony in the Battle of Actium in 31 BCE. In the Republic period, art was often produced in the service of the state, depicting public sacrifice or celebrating victorious military campaigns. Portraiture extolled the communal goals of the Republic, this idea of hard work, age, wisdom, being a community leader and soldier were very important. Patrons chose to have themselves represented with balding heads, large noses, and extra wrinkles, demonstrating that they had spent their lives demonstrating that they had spent their lives working for the Republic as a model citizen, flaunting their acquired wisdom with each furrow of the brow. We now call this portrait style veristic, referring to the hyper-naturalistic features that emphasize every flaw, creating portraits of individuals with personality and essence. So that's how you can tell, this might, when you first look at it, seem Greek because it's marble, but the Greeks would never, ever, except maybe in the Hellenistic period, would have depicted old age. But again, the Romans appreciated those ideas that being old showed wisdom and leadership, and so they actually sometimes would even have more wrinkles, put into the sculpture. I don't know much about who made Roman art. Artists certainly existed in antiquity, but we know very little about them, especially during the Roman period, because of a lack of documentary evidence. Sorry about that, I got interrupted. Um, so yes, there weren't very good example, or there aren't a lot of examples of contracts or letters, maybe telling us who the patron or who the artist of some of these works were. What evidence we do have, such as Pliny the Elder's natural history, um, pays little attention to contemporary artists and often focuses more on the Greek artists of the past. As a result, scholars do not refer to specific artists, but consider them generally as a large anonymous group. Another question that we always have a tendency to ask when, especially studying a new culture or period in art history is, why did they make art? Roman art encompasses private art made for Roman homes, which we're going to be learning about in a minute, for Roman houses, as well as art in public spheres, which we'll look at later. The elite Roman home provided an opportunity for the owner to display his wealth, taste, and education to his visitors, dependents, and clients. Since Roman homes were regularly visited and were meant to be viewed, their decoration was of the utmost importance. Wall paintings, mosaics, and sculptural displays were often incorporated seamlessly with small luxury items such as bronze figurines and silver bowls. The subject matter ranged from busts, like that we just looked at, of important ancestors to mythological and historical scenes, still lifes, and landscapes, all to create the idea of this very high status patron that's sort of steeped in culture and sophistication. So what you're looking at are some layouts and floor plans of a typical plan of a Roman house. Understanding the architecture of the Roman house requires more than simply appreciating the names of the various parts of the structure, as the house itself is an important part of the dynamics of daily life and the socio-economy of the Roman world. The house type that we're looking at is referred to as a domus, D-O-M-U-S, Latin for house. Is taken to mean a structure designed for either a nuclear or an extended family and is usually located in a city or town. The domus has a general architecture type that has long lived in the Roman world, although some developments of the architecture form do occur, or some variations. While the sites of Pompeii and Herculaneum provide the best surviving evidence of domus architecture, this typology of the Roman home was widespread in the Roman world. So, basically here we'll go through these parts of what these rooms were, but cubiculum was like a bedroom. There's an atrium. An impluvium is like a pool. So we'll kind of look through these different parts, and usually it was more public at the front of the house and became more private with the bedrooms and, you know, the dining room and areas like that being, more for the family. While there is not a standard domus structure, it is possible to discuss the primary features of a generic example, keeping in mind the variations that might manifest in different ways with other types of buildings or other examples of domuses. The ancient architecture writer Vitruvius provided a wealth of information on the potential configurations of domus architecture, in particular the main room of the domus that was known as the atrium, and that should be number 3 in your plan that's in front of you. In the classic layout of the Roman domus, the atrium served as the focus of the entire house plan. As the main room in the public part of the house, which is known as pars urbana, the atrium was the center of the house social and political life. The male head of the household would receive his clients on business days in the atrium, in which case it functioned as a sort of waiting room for business appointments. Those clients would enter the atrium from the fauces, number 1 in the diagram above, that you see in front of you. And this is a narrow entry passageway that communicated with the street. The doorway would be watched in wealthier houses by a doorman. Given that the atrium was a room where invited guests and clients would wait and spend time, it was also the room on which the house owner would lavish attention and funds in order to make sure the room was well appointed with decorations. The corner of the room might sport the household shrine, and funeral masks of the family's dead ancestors might be kept in a small cabinet in the atrium. Communicating with the atrium might be bed chambers, cubicula. This is number 8 in your diagram above. Side rooms or wings, alle, number 7 in your diagram, and the offices of the head of the household, known as tablinum, number 5 in your diagram. The tablinum offered at the rear of the atrium. The tablinum, often at the rear of the atrium, is usually a square chamber that would have been furnished with paraphernalia of the head of the household, the paternal father, and his business interests. This could include a writing table as well as examples of strong boxes. And we see this evidence in some contexts in Pompeii houses as well. Beyond the atrium and the tablinum lay the more private parts of the house. This is known as pars rustica. That was often centered around an open-air courtyard known as a peristyle. We saw this term with the peristyle temple that we looked at when we were looking at Greek architecture. So this is number 11 in your diagram. The pars rustica would have generally been off limits to business clients and served as the focus of the family life of the house. A central portion of the peristyle would have opened to the sky and could be the site of a decorative garden, fountains, artworks, or a functional kitchen, garden, or a combination of these elements. The size and arrangement of the peristyle varies quite depending on the size of the house itself. Communicating with the peristyle, and I think I'm sorry, I messed up, would be a functional room like the kitchen, the colina, this is number 9 in the diagram, bedrooms, cubicula, number 8 in the diagram, slave quarters, latrines, and baths in some cases, and the all-important dining room. This is the triclinium. And remember, when we were looking at the Etruscan tomb paintings, remember they were actually sitting on a triclinium couch. This is sort of a couch that they would dine on, and they would be laying down as opposed to sitting up. The triclinium would be the room used for elaborate dinner parties to which guests would be invited. The dinner party involved much more than drinking and eating, however, as entertainment, discussion, and philosophical dialogues were frequently on the menu for the evening. Those invited to the dinner party would be the close friends, family, and associates of the head of the household, the father. The triclinium would often be elaborately decorated with wall paintings and portable artworks. The guests at the dinner party were arranged according to a specific formula that gave privileged places to those of higher rank. Here's another view of a plan of a Roman house. One thing to remember too with these domus houses is that Roman cities were very urban and incorporated a grid system in the layout of the streets. Houses were very similar to the row houses that you see sometimes in downtown neighborhoods today, and they were very clustered and close together. Again, just to reiterate, houses usually had sort of a business in the front, rooms or held businesses of the structures, more private domestic areas such as sleep quarters, the atrium, the central courtyard, and the small impluvium, which is a pool for collecting water, were located in the back of the house. Again, many houses incorporated a peristyle courtyard, and that's a courtyard or garden with a covered walkway all the way around it, with columns holding up the ceiling so you can see out into the garden. Peri means around and style means column, so we saw that with the Greek architecture. So this is sort of an idea of a Roman street scene and how close the houses would be to one another. Perhaps from living in such an urban environment, Romans loved nature and wanted to bring it indoors with lavish depictions of gardens and landscapes on their walls and panel painting, which is what we're going to be looking at next. So here's an example. We're going to be looking at some houses in Pompeii because those are the best preserved. So what you're looking at here is the atrium. We see the impluvium right here. This is from the House of the Silver Wedding, which is located on Pompeii. The ancient city may be quiet now, Pompeii. Its life ended by a fantastic cataclysm nearly 2,000 years ago. This was when the volcano erupted, Mount Vesuvius. But the remains of the house, decoration, and objects of daily life whisper to us about the lives of the ancient people who inhabited Pompeii before the eruption of Mount Vesuvius. Domestic spaces in particular often offer a rich resource for examining ancient lives and in some cases ended abruptly. Pompeii was thriving up until the moment of its destruction, and in studying its life interpreted, we arrive at important insights about what it was like to live in the Roman Mediterranean, in ancient Roman Mediterranean. Paintings from antiquity rarely survive. Paint, after all, is much less durable medium than stone or bronze sculpture, but it is thanks to the ancient Roman city of Pompeii that we can trace the history of Roman wall painting. The entire city was buried in the volcanic ash in 79 CE when the volcano at Mount Vesuvius erupted, thus preserving the rich colors in the paintings in the houses and monuments there for thousands and thousands of years until their rediscovery. These paintings represent an uninterrupted sequence of 2 centuries of evidence of Roman domestic life. So what we're going to be focusing on is the House of Vete, which is a very important um, house in Pompeii, and we're going to be looking at some of the wall paintings. And so the House of Vete is a Roman townhouse, a domus style, located within the ruined ancient city of Pompeii. Um, and The House of Vete was excavated between late 1894 and early 1896. The artifacts that were recovered allowed for the identification of the house's putative owners, Aulus Vetus Conviva and his brother Aulus Vetus Retutus. Both men had been identified as former slaves um, or freedmen, liberate. The Veti had risen to such prominence. Conviva was an Augustulus This was the top civic office for which a freed man would be eligible. In the construction and decoration of their house, the brothers displayed a mindset not common among the newly rich. Two strong boxes, archaea, essentially lockable boxes for storing valuables, concrete signs of wealth were placed prominently in the large atrium so visitors would be sure to notice them. In addition to the strong boxes, there's beautiful examples of third and fourth century style wall painting that we're going to be looking at. And so the combination of all these different elements really conveyed a certain sort of status and wealth of these previous slaves. So this is the Peristyle Garden that we're looking at the house of Vete in Pompeii. So you can kind of see the garden, and then you have this sort of colonnade going around the space. And then this is what it looks like, a view through the atrium to the Peristyle Garden. The House of Vete covers an area of approximately 1,100 square meters. The construction of the house and its decorations belong to the final period of Pompeii's occupation and therefore provide important evidence of the aesthetics of the city on the eve of its destruction. The house was built atop the remains of an earlier house that survives in part in the form of the wings, allée, and the doorway. The plan of the House of Vete had two central halls, atria, and significantly lacks an office space, a tablinum. Entry to the house was gained from the east by way of a vestibule that granted admission to the larger atrium. The stone-lined basin for collecting rainwater, the impluvium, lies at the center of the atrium. The larger atrium communicates directly with the peristyle, an open courtyard surrounded by fluted Doric columns. Remember, the Doric columns are those kind of flat pancake capitals by means of a set of folding doors. The smaller atrium was the focus of the service portion of the house, while the peristyle and its well-appointed rooms was meant for entertaining and dining. So we're going to be looking at different types of Roman wall painting. There were four styles of Roman wall painting. The ones found in Pompeii were not unique to the city and can be observed elsewhere. Like Romans, and even in the provinces, but Pompeii and the surrounding cities buried by Vesuvius contain the largest continuous source of evidence for this period. The Roman wall painting in Pompeii was categorized were true frescoes or buon fresco. So this is a term that I want you guys to know. So fresco is painting or pigment added to wet plaster. Buon means wet, fresco. So again, this term means that pigment was applied to wet plaster, fixing the pigment to the wall. Despite this durable technique, painting is still a fragile medium, and once exposed to light and air, can fade significantly. The first style of Roman wall painting is often referred to as the Masonry style, and it is believed that its origins laid in the Hellenistic period in the 3rd century BCE in Alexandria. The first style is characterized by colorful patchwork walls of brightly painted faux marble. Each rectangle of painted marble was connected by stucco moldings that added a three-dimensional effect. In temples and other office buildings, the Romans used costly imported marble in a variety of colors to decorate the walls. Ordinary Romans could not afford such expense, so they decorated their homes with painted imitations of the luxurious yellow, purple, and pink marble that the Greeks used. Painters became so skilled at imitating certain marble that the large rectangular slabs were rendered on the wall marbled. Rectangular slabs were rendered on the wall marbled and veined, just like real pieces of stone. So this is what you're looking at. It looks like these are sort of insets of marble, but it's actually painted. The second style, which is called the architectural style, was first seen in Pompeii around 800 BCE, although it developed earlier in Rome, and was in vogue until the end of the first century BCE. The second Pompeian style developed out of the first style and incorporated elements of the first, such as foam marbled blocks along the base of walls. Rooms also had beautiful mosaics installed in the floors um, where walls sort of kind of continued the illusion of depicting these sort of architectural elements. So this is the second style. So while the first style embraced the flatness of the wall, the second style attempted to trick the viewer into believing that they were looking through a window by painting illusionistic images. As the name for the second style implies, architectural elements drive the painting, creating fantastic images filled with columns, buildings, and stoas. These are covered walkways or porticos. And it's sort of this idea of an architectural fantasy. Here's another example. So this Roman second style of wall painting was really this idea of experimenting with the illusion of space and perspective. And so you get these kind of, this idea of depth and this idea of perspective. So you can kind of see how they're playing around with that. This idea of perspective will become very important when we look at the Renaissance. This the second style wall painting, um, is again, considered very illusionistic. Um, so here you can sort of see this artist sort of experimenting with like this idea. It's not correct, but this idea of like sort of all these points converging into one line, sort of known as one point perspective. This isn't quite right, but you can see how they're sort of experimenting with that notion of one point perspective. In addition to urbanscapes, they also painted beautiful gardenscapes. Um, so with this second style, we see the emergence of a 3D world on a 2D surface. Artists use this idea of illusionistic painting to bring the outdoors and nature inside. Remember, because Rome and these cities were so urban and they were all kind of close together, um, some scholars believe that painting these sort of scenes, especially nature, was a way for them to bring the nature indoors. Here the artist had created a cultivated garden with an actual fence or wall around it. Beyond the garden fence, we observe the juxtaposition of a wild landscape. So here we kind of see this sort of cultivated garden, but then beyond the wall, it becomes very lush and wild-like. And it does. When we look at this, we see that the fence shows experimentation with perspective. Again, this is the art of drawing solid objects on a two-dimensional surface so that it gives the right impression of their height, width, depth, and position in relation to each other when viewed from a particular point, or in this case, intuitive perspective. So that's what we would call this. The artist has created a general impression of real space beyond the wall. Also, he's incorporated, or she, probably he, incorporated this idea of atmospheric perspective. This refers to the effect of the atmosphere that has on the appearance of an object as it is viewed from a distance. As the distance between an object and a viewer increases, the contrast between the object and its background decreases, and the contrast of any markings or details within the object also decrease. The colors of the object also become less saturated and shift towards the background color, which is usually blue. Um, and so, this idea of perspective is that as things go into the background, they become less distinct and more sort of fuzzy. So that's a term that we need to know as well: atmospheric perspective and intuitive perspective. And here's another view of this beautiful gardenscape. So this is another famous work. This is the Villa of Mysteries in Pompeii. This one's a little bit different because we actually see figures being depicted. This scene depicts what art historians believe to be an initiation into a mystery cult devoted to the god Dionysus or Bacchus, the god of wine. The composition is subdivided by black stripes meant to represent plaster. Figures appear to stand on a green stage. The background is a deep red color. In color theory, red and green are referred to as complementary colors. They are opposite each other on the color wheel. They contrast with each other, and this contrast intensifies the saturation of each color. This use of complementary color seems to push the figures forward into our space. So again, we see this use of trying to create illusionistic space. So in color theory, warm colors advance and come forward, cool colors seem to recede. And so we can sort of see how the artist is experimenting with color in a deliberate way so as to give us this sort of idea of depth on a two-dimensional surface. And it's interesting. It's an interesting sort of wall painting to look at because there's just lots of interesting characters and just, weird stuff going on. So there's a video we'll watch related to this because it's just so interesting. The third style rim and wall painting is referred to as the ornate style. It came about in the 1st century CE and was popular until about 50 CE. The third style embraced the flat surface of the wall through the use of broad, monochromatic planes of color, such as black or dark red, punctuated by a sort of minute, intricate details. So you can kind of see this here. And then you have this sort of little tiny architectural image here. The third style was still architectural, but rather than implementing plausible architectural elements that viewers would see in their everyday world, and that would function in sort of an engineering sense. The third style incorporated fantastic and stylized columns and pediments that could only exist in the imagined spaces of in a fantasy. The Roman architect Vitruvius was certainly not a fan of the third style painting, and he criticized the painting for representing monstrosities rather than real things. So again, we often see usually the center of the wall featured very small vignettes, such as a sort of idyllic landscape or sort of a bucolic sort of agricultural scene of the countryside, as you see here. So the fourth style, which is what we're going to be looking at, and an example that you have to know on the list of 250 AP works that you have to know is the fourth style, and this was referred to as the intricate style. It became popular in the mid-1st century CE, and it is seen in Pompeii until the city's destruction in 79 CE. It can best be described as a combination of the three styles that came before. So we see faux marble blocks along the base of the wall, as in the first style, framed the naturalistic architectural scene of the second style, which in turn combines with the large flat planes of color and slender architectural details from the third style. The fourth style also incorporates central panel pictures, although on a much larger scale than in the third style, and with a much wider range of themes incorporating mythological genre, landscape, and still life images. In describing what we now call the fourth style, Pliny the Elder said that it was developed by a rather eccentric, talented painter named Famulus, who decorated Nero's famous garden palace. Some of the best examples of fourth style painting come from the house of Vete, which you can visit today in Pompeii. So these are examples that you see here. The decorative schema of the House of the Vete provides important evidence for the trends in domestic decoration in the final years of Pompey's occupation. Since Pompeii suffered a major earthquake in 62 CE that caused significant destruction, the chronology of the wall painting and other decorations in the House of Vete have been a topic of debate since the house's discovery. Many art historians point to the house's decorative scheme as being representative of a key transitional phase between the third and fourth style of Pompeian wall painting. Some scholars consider it among the finest examples of the fourth style at Pompeii. Paul Zucker sees the fourth style wall painting as being imitations of higher art forms, reckoning that the chosen pictures aim to turn the rooms into picture galleries. The atrium is richly decorated, as are all the rooms opening into the Peristyle courtyard. Two of these were in the course of being painted at the time of destruction, while the other three are richly finished and appointed with fourth style wall painting. The largest of these, a dining room, is decorated in panels of red, black, with an exceptional fine motifs of little, which we're looking at here, of little Erotus or Putti, these sort of mythologically winged gods associated with love, engaged in sort of various activities. So these are ones that are in your list of 250 works. So these are some fourth style wall paintings from the House of Vete. This is the Ixion room. This is a wall painting, and and again, remember the fourth style combines first, second, and third. And here, there's a better picture of that one. And so this picture is in the back wall of the reception room and shows Pentheus. This is a figure in Greek mythology being torn to pieces. Pentheus opposed the cult of Bacchus in his city and so was torn to pieces by women in a Bacchian frenzy who were involved in the cult. Pentheus's mother was one of the women responsible for tearing her son to pieces. However, in her madness and frenzy, she did not recognize her own son. The picture shows two women pulling at Pentheus's hair, with other women preparing to attack him. Pentheus himself is kneeling on his left knee and trying to escape these frenzied women. It's a pretty violent scene. This is another painting. This picture is from the left-hand wall of the reception room, and it shows Hercules killing a serpent. Hercules was the son of Juniper and Alcmena. Juniper had taken on the appearance of Alcmena's husband in order to seduce her. Juniper's wife, was jealous of this child, and so she went to I think an island and gave birth to Euthreus. She wanted her son to be greater than Hercules, and so she put serpents into Hercules' cradle. However, Hercules succeeded in overpowering these serpents. The picture shows Hercules wrestling and strangling a snake. So you see little baby Hercules here, which is kind of cute and kind of disturbing to you to see a baby being attacked by snakes. To the right of the painting is Amphitryon, who is amazed at the sight. This is his mother. Behind him is Juno, and Juniper is represented by the eagle in the painting. So again, we see a combination of all the different styles of wall painting. All right, so we're going to stop here. We're going to continue looking at the art of Republican Rome, but we're going to be looking at sculpture and architecture in our next subunit or part. Stay tuned.